Lauren mentioned, I'm Gunita. I'm a staff attorney at the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press. We take a wide definition of news media at RCFP. So that of course includes documentary filmmakers, really anyone in the business of acquiring and then disseminating information to a broader audience. So please know that our resources are for all of you and your friends and colleagues. I love FOIA and public records. I feel like to understand the power of public records, I think if we hit the next button one more time, a couple things might pop up at the top. Okay, perfect. To understand, thank you. To understand what FOIA and state public records laws can be used for, we really need to look no further than the headlines that surround us when we read the news, but also I included some documentary films here too to really drive the point home that FOIA is for everyone, including documentary filmmakers. 1971, I feel like is such a seminal example because the filmmakers used FOIA to put the puzzle pieces together to understand the full extent of FBI surveillance into First Amendment protected activities by those protesting the war in Vietnam. And The Animal People is one really close to my heart. A lot of my friends are actually featured in this, and it details FBI surveillance of animal rights activists, also once again engaging in entirely First Amendment protected activity. So if all of this sounds exciting to you, then we want to dive into the basics of how to approach using these public records laws. So I think a lot of this is self-explanatory, but we're going to double click on just a few of those which entail a bit more nuance. But you really want to familiarize yourself with the statute at issue. So for the federal FOIA, we've got a resource called the FOIA Wiki. That's foia.wiki, which will be your North Star throughout the FOIA process. Me and my colleagues at the Reporters Committee are regularly updating it essentially on a weekly basis when there's new case law, interpreting the federal FOIA and its contours. And so in general, FOIA provides any person or newsroom or company a right of access to existing records of federal executive branch agencies unless they are exempt. And I want to focus in on that unless they are exempt language, because inherent in FOIA is a presumption of disclosure, which is just so remarkable, right? So whenever you're faced with unjustified delays or denials, you want to remember there's a presumption in favor of disclosure. So you're entitled to stay vigilant and push back, administratively or through litigation against those unjustified denials. And by and large, these contours are similar for state public records laws with a bit of variation. And I'll note in the next couple of slides where that variation might pop up. So let's briefly discuss each of those elements, focusing on agencies. And I'm a real big Star Wars fan. So any other Star Wars nerds out there, you talk to me about the Obi-Wan miniseries because I got some thoughts. So FOIA, of course, at the federal level only applies to executive branch agencies. At the state level, you might have some public records laws that actually encompass legislatures as well, but that's not the case at the federal level. So with federal FOIA, we are thinking about the Death Star, right? We're thinking about like the executive branch. We're not thinking about the Galactic Senate, which is the legislature. So, here we've got a couple examples of those quintessential agencies that FOIA applies to, right? DOJ. One nuance I wanted to highlight is there is a Supreme Court case from 1980, which says that executive branch agencies where their sole job is to advise and assist the president, those are not subject to FOIA. So I'll give you an example so we can make this a bit more clear. So under the umbrella, the executive office of the president, you've got the White House, that is not subject to FOIA. You've got the Office of Management and Budget, that is subject to FOIA. You've got the National Security Council, that is not subject to FOIA because at the National Security Council, their sole role is to advise and assist the president. So I say all of this just because at the outset, you want to make sure you've got these sort of boxes checked off just to streamline the process moving forward. And you want to get creative. So for example, just because an entity may contract with the federal government doesn't automatically make them subject to FOIA. So maybe you're trying to get certain medical or hospital themed records. You probably won't be able to send a FOIA request to the hospital, but the VA, which is an executive agency subject to FOIA, you will be able to get records from them. So think creatively at the outset. So now we have a sense of who you can get records from. What can you ask them for? So FOIA applies to agency records that already exist. And this can apply to emails, call logs, video files, and paper documents. I was able to get some video clips from Voice of America, which is it's basically a program put on by the Broadcasting Board of Governors. It's sort of like the federal government's it's programming they use to sort of spread democracy throughout the world. So I was able to get some video